everybody. Welcome to our Bible study on demand. This is part 2 of our Hot Topic series. We're very excited to be able to offer this series to you. And what we're doing in this series is actually listening to you. So there's a 4-part series. You're telling me what are some of the topics that you most would want to know about and to learn about. And so I've taken all of your suggestions and kind of put them in categories, which is what we're doing in this series. Check out the last video that started it. We talked about church impact. Is the church still making a difference today? That was the previous video. And I'm excited today to talk about this one. This one here. Most of you, the most number of things that people have requested me to talk about in today's video. And so I'm going to be talking about all things relationships. And so we're going to be talking about it all, from dating to engaged to marriage, divorce, blended family, sex, all of the stuff that you have asked me to talk about. We're going to try to put it all in this video today. So we're very, very excited. As a matter of fact, go ahead and tell somebody, come in the room and watch it with you now, because you probably need somebody to have a conversation with you with this subject here, since you want to talk. So many people want to talk about it. Make sure you're not watching this video alone. So let's go ahead and get started. In order to give this Bible study its proper perspective, it's really good that we first examine, kind of where we are as a nation, like what really is going on in terms of relationships in our country. That would give us kind of a platform and a foundation of which to build off of. So I'm going to give you some statistics that are actual things that are happening in our country today. These come from usafacts.org, and you can get this information for yourself. And so as of 2022, 46% of households, or 46.8% of households in our country are married couples. That, by the way, is a significant decrease in the percentage of married couples in our country from, let's say, 1950. In the 1950s, we know that 78.8% of all households were married couples. So if you put that together, that's a 32% drop in terms of the percentage of those who are married couples in our country. In 2022, we know that the median age of people getting married has also been higher than it's ever been. So the median age now for men in our country getting married is age 30, whereas for women it is age 28. Whereas again, going back to the 1950s or 1956, the median age was 22.5 for men and 20 years old for women. Now, we can suggest that obviously there are very different times between the 1950s and today. We know that. But what we also know is that people are waiting longer today to get married for various reasons. And it's the largest gap in terms of age and how long people are choosing to wait to be married than it has ever been in our country. So that is something that we cannot ignore. What we also know, and this comes from the Christian Action League, you can look this up as well. If you're going to talk about marriage rates, then you also have to talk about, unfortunately, divorce rates. And what we know that in our country, divorce rates overall is around 24%. Now, that might not seem like a large number, but when you actually dig a little bit deeper into the numbers, you'll see that they are quite alarming. For first-time people who get married, the first marriage, the divorce rate is actually 43% overall. For the second time someone chooses to get married, that rate actually increases. It does not decrease to 60%. And then for those who are getting married for a third time, again, that number does not decrease. It actually increases to 70%. So even though overall you see the 24%, 24% could also include people who are married but separated. It can include people who are married but really are not satisfied or happy, but they choose to continue to stay married. And then you dig into the numbers a little bit deeper and you can see where the divorce rates are. And guess what? These numbers aren't less for Christian couples. As a matter of fact, studies have shown that 42% of Christian marriages also end in divorce. So there really is no significant difference between a Christian and a non-Christian when it comes to marriage and divorce in our country. Now, when we also continue along this line, anything that happens nationwide, generally speaking, is usually going to have a greater and higher and some more significant impact within the African American community. So within the African American community, only about 26% of African American adults are married. That is the lowest of any ethnic group by far in our country. 59% of African Americans have either done it before or are currently cohabitating with another partner. That is also the highest of any ethnic group in the country, and it's not even close. And so what that tells us within our own community is that African Americans are choosing not to marry, but still choosing to have a form of marriage or a form of a family, however they are choosing to define what that family looks like. And then we also know that when you look at less marriages, that is going to impact children. And so nearly 70%, 7 out of every 10 African American children are raised in a single parent household. So that is certainly an alarming number. So then the question becomes, if people are getting married, but divorce rates are where they are, well, what are some of the reasons of why people are choosing to dissolve their unions? Well, there are many that we could identify, but let me just give you the top 5 according to statistical data, and this comes from marriage.com. And this is overall. This is not linked to any one ethnic group, but it does kind of give you a snapshot of where people are and what are causing marriages to dissolve in our country at an alarming rate. Number 1 is infidelity or adultery, and that may not be surprising to people. Number 2 is a general overall lack of commitment to the marriage, where one or both partners are not really all in the relationship, and that's causing stress and pressure on the other partner, or both partners really aren't doing all that's necessary to make the marriage work. Number 3 is poor communication. And I will tell you that for the couples that I normally see in my office after marriage and they're really dealing with challenges, this probably is the one that I tend to deal with the most, where one spouse is saying that they just don't know how to communicate to the other spouse, or the other spouse is not effectively communicating back to them. And so poor communication is a big issue that's leading to divorce, especially when it comes to a lack of conflict resolution skills that are not evident between partners in a relationship. So if you're arguing all the time and you don't know how to solve the issues, you don't know how to really speak through the challenges that you're having, then what ends up happening is that these issues tend to compound one over the other, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with an avalanche of things that are happening in your relationship, and it's hard to really overcome that. So that's number 3, poor communication or lack of communication, conflict resolution skills. Number 4, it's no surprise, is money. Money or lack thereof, or money and not really having a clear understanding of how to spend it or what to do with it or how to best utilize it is a huge issue in a lot of relationships. And some would argue that it should be higher than number 4. But money certainly is on this top 5 list. And then the last one, and again, all of this is, according to marriage.com, lack of intimacy is number 5. This lack of connection, whether it is emotional, whether it is physical, it's just a lack of intimacy of which partners feel. And so this could happen, especially with couples who have been together for a very long time, number of years, and then all of a sudden you see after 25 or 30 years, they decide to end their marriage, and people are surprised. Well, while you've been married that long, it would seem like everything would be fine, but no, maybe things have eroded over time where intimacy or connection is no longer felt, and you just get to the place where you realize that you're really not spouses anymore. Maybe you're roommates, or you just happen to be in the same space, but you're not really connected. So these are the top 5. Again, infidelity, lack of commitment, poor communication, money, and then certainly lack of intimacy. So when you put all of that together and you see all of the challenges, and I didn't mention a whole lot more of the issues, but when you put all of the things that I've shared with you already, here's where we are today. More people than ever are deciding, you know what, I don't want to get married, but I still want to have kids. And so you see that children now are being raised in a lot of different family dynamics than ever before in the history of our country. Number 2, there are some people legitimately that still want to get married, but cannot find a partner of which to marry. And this is in particular for African American women. As a matter of fact, research is telling us that 48% of African American women have never been married in our country, and that number is likely to increase over the next 10 years and not decrease. So if you have half of African American women that are looking for a suitable partner and cannot find one to marry, then what does that mean for the family? What does that mean for them wanting to have children? What does this mean for our society? What does it mean for the kids? All of this is impacting our communities, because communities are only as strong as the families. And then when you add all of that, who is impacted the most by marriage and divorce are not the adults, but it's the kids. And sadly, our kids are tremendously being impacted and affected by all of the different family dynamics that we see playing out today. It is no wonder that our kids are acting out or having all types of issues and things that are going on, and we're shaking our heads wondering what's going on. Well, maybe we need to, as adults, take a look at ourselves and ask ourselves, what kind of environment are we raising our kids in? What kind of home life are our kids being exposed to? What kind of things are they seeing on a consistent basis? Because I will tell you, I have sat in numerous meetings with elected officials, other pastors, school leaders, and everybody is asking the same question. What can we do to help our kids? Law enforcement, you name it. I've had more meetings about this subject than I care to admit. And the answer is the same in every meeting. No matter how many programs we put together, no matter how many after-school programs, church programs, law enforcement programs, no matter how many diversion tactics we put in place, and those things are important. Don't get me wrong. These things are necessary. After-school programs, mentoring, all of those things are extremely important and extremely necessary to have. But at the end of all of it, the kids at night still got to go home. And the reality is, what are they walking into when they have to go home? What kind of situation and family dynamics are they having to deal with? And this is why young people more than ever before are talking about and saying, hey, we need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about our well-being, because maybe the dysfunction that they're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis at home is causing a lot of their anxiety and stress, and don't nobody want to talk about it. But since you asked me to talk about relationships, here it is. So for those of us in my generation and older, before we look at our kids and say, Lord, have mercy, and before we want to throw this generation away and say there's no hope for this generation, maybe we need to ask ourselves, how do we raise our kids? Because these are our kids. These are the kids of our generation and their kids. So what did we do or not do that contributed to what we're seeing in the next generations? We can't all put this on these kids. The environments in which they have been raised is also playing a significant factor, because somewhere along the line, we decided that marriage or the definition of marriage or maybe what we even saw growing up caused us not to want to get married. And that's your choice and that's your right. But when you bring kids into the world, these kids are not being exposed to a stable, nurturing, consistent environment, and it is causing all types of problems in schools and in our communities. That's the summary of where we are today. Now, having said that, let's talk about dating. What can we do now? Social media is robbing people of a lot of goodness. And I would add that even with the advent of technology and everybody on their phones, there's less of an understanding of how to relate to people. So in the interest of this video, and I don't certainly have enough time to cover all aspects of dating, being engaged, and being married, but what I will give you is just some summary points of things that you really need to consider. And a lot of this is for single people. If you're listening to me right now, before you even start dating, you need to have some things in place for yourself. Number one, you have to know and love yourself before you want to start dating and bringing somebody else into your world. A lot of people are looking for love in the wrong places. And a lot of people are looking for love because of what they did not get at home. So unfortunately, you have a lot of young women who are choosing to date, not because they really want to have a partner, but because they are seeking validation from another person because they didn't get that validation from their father or somebody else when they were growing up. So they're really not interested in dating per se. They're just looking for somebody to love and affirm them. And what I'm saying to you is, if you're out there and you're looking to be in a relationship, not because of that person, but because of what you didn't get when you were at home growing up, then you're likely to end up with somebody that in all intents and purposes may take advantage of you and may put you in bad situations because you need to heal from what you dealt with growing up. And so this is the pattern that you see a lot of people in, good people finding themselves in bad situations and bad relationships because you have not yet learned to know who you are and you have not yet learned to love yourself. So before I can bring anybody else into my space, I need to know me first. I need to love me first. I need to understand me first, so that I know what's important for me. And unfortunately, too many people don't know who you are. You don't know or love yourself. And so you're putting that in the hands of somebody else, hoping they will treat you right. And unfortunately, many of them are not. And it is causing you more pain and suffering. Number two, you have to not only love yourself and know yourself, but then this is also important if you're going to date, you have to clearly know what you want and what you need from a partner before you start dating. Why do you actually need to be in a relationship? What is it that you want? Is it companionship? Is it to share a life with someone? Is it something else? I have found that a lot of people are dating just because that's the cultural thing to do or the social thing to do. Or maybe people date because they just don't want to be alone. But those aren't always the best reasons for why you should be with someone else. You got to be clear in what it is that you want and what you are seeking, which leads me to my last point. Once you know what you want, you must then be able to have to stand on that. And in some cases, walk away when you're not getting what you want. Now, I know people are going to tell me, well, Pastor, you know what? It's hard out here in these streets. It's already tough. It's already slim pickings. And there's already not enough good candidates for men or women that are out here. But here's what I also know. Even though that you may believe that that's true, I also know this. It is better to be at peace with yourself than to be with somebody that is bringing you down and causing you to feel certain ways and stressing you out and putting you in a dysfunctional situation. And I'm telling you, if you don't know what you want clearly up front, then you're going to get somebody that's going to treat you any kind of way. And if you're not willing to stand on what you believe in, then you have to be willing to say, this ain't for me. So I'm going to say this to you all as far as dating. When people show you the warning signs that are things that are red flags for you and you keep going, then you can't blame the other person. If you're driving down the street and you see a sign that says this road ends in 1 mile, and here's the sign, and here's the last exit to get off this road before this road ends, and you decide not to take the exit, but you want to keep driving ahead, and then the road ends and you crash, you can't blame the other person. Pay attention to the warning signs, because that might be God's way of telling you it's time to get off this road. So here are some guidelines for dating. Number one, you got to love yourself first. And you can't be looking for somebody else to do that for you. You have to do it yourself. Number two, you have to clearly know what you want in a relationship. And then number three, you got to be willing to stand on that and be willing to walk away if necessary to protect your peace. Don't be overlooking those warning signs. Don't just laugh off the red flags and think that they're going to go away in time. They usually don't. What are some guidelines then for being engaged? Well, we know that engagement is the next step. Then dating, it's the next level to dating, but it's not quite marriage just yet. So in the engagement phase, what you should be doing if you are in that space is building on your commitment in your relationship. Your commitment shouldn't be less, it should be more, because that's the biggest difference between dating, being engaged, and being married. It's your level of commitment. So you should be deepening your commitment as you are in the engagement phase. But more importantly, engagement is the time of which you and your partner should become more aligned in your expectations. I have found, and even me, I was guilty of this before I got married. I got married because I just thought that my wife looked good. I just wanted to build a life with her. But I didn't realize that there were some things where we were not aligned before we got married. And those things came back and caused us challenge early on in our relationship. And because you're so busy in the engagement phase trying to plan a wedding and trying to get all that stuff right because you want the day to be perfect, but you are operating off, in many cases, assumptions of what you think your partner's going to do once you get married. And unless you have genuine, heartfelt conversations before you get married about how things should be, then you're operating off of assumptions. And quite frankly, you're going to have a nice wedding day, but then you're going to have a rough start to your marriage. So make sure that you're in alignment, that you're working in harmony, that you share in agreements about expectations. Who's going to do what? How is this relationship going to play out? Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to cook, or who's going to do chores? Who's going to do life? How are we going to raise these kids? All of that is in alignment that's necessary so that once you get married, you're off to a good start. And then the last thing is in the engagement phase, not only should you know you and your partner, you need to understand how you and your partner are going to flow with each other. People make a common mistake and believe that once we get married, everything's going to change. You know, whatever I see now, yeah, it's going to go away. And that person ain't going to do that no more once we get to the altar. Magically, it's going to disappear. And anybody that's been married long enough knows that just is a flat out lie, right? Whatever you see before the marriage, you likely going to see after the marriage, and it's likely going to stay. So you need to know your partner, you need to know you, so that y'all can be in agreement about how you're going to play off of each other, because I'm here to tell you, in most cases, a lot of the things that you see now, you're going to see later. So now's the time to address whatever it is in terms of how y'all talk to each other, how you communicate, how you date, how you deal with stuff. You need to do that now. Yeah, you getting so happy about the dress, you coming down the aisle, you better start having some conversations now about how you want to deal with stuff later. Trust me on that. So that's engagement. Now, once you're married, and again, it's a different level of commitment. Dating, engagement, and marriage are all very different spaces of a relationship, but the biggest difference is commitment. But what I want people to understand about marriage is that, first of all, marriage is spiritual. It is not just two people walking down an aisle and saying I do, and then you go into the reception and do the electric slide. That's not what marriage is. Marriage is spiritual. And so if you don't have a spiritual connection in your marriage, that's why the Bible says that a threefold cord cannot be easily broken. You need God in your marriage. And this isn't even about just church and coming to church. You need to have a spiritual connection, both of you, in your marriage. Now, let me just talk to the husband for a moment. If you are called to be the lead of your household, how are you going to lead without God directing you? You don't have any spiritual connection. How are you going to lead? If you don't have a spiritual connection, then what you're really doing is like what most men do. You just getting in the car driving, and you ain't telling nobody where you're going. You hope you get there. You hope everybody else don't say nothing to you about where we're going, and you just hope that you get to the next destination. But what happens if you get lost? Because that's what's going to happen if there's no spiritual connection. And so wives, also having a spiritual connection helps you to understand also how to interact and engage and connect with your husband. And so all of this is important. Marriage is spiritual. It is reflective of the relationship between Jesus Christ and the church. And if you don't understand that going in, then you're just going to think that marriage is about you and this other person till death do you part. You're likely to have problems. Number two, marriage is work. Anybody that's been married long enough knows it ain't easy. You got to put the work in, and one of the killers of marriage is laziness. You start saying stuff, well, he should know me by now, or she should know me by now. We've always done it this way, and we just gonna keep doing it this way. And you stop putting work in. You did all this when you was dating, and you did all this stuff, went all these trips, and went all these places, did all this stuff. Then you get married, you don't even want to get off the couch. What's wrong with you? You done got lazy. You stop putting work in. And once you start putting work in on anything, that thing gonna start falling apart. Marriage is work. And anybody that been married long enough will tell you that in order to keep it at a certain level, you have to put work in. So stop being lazy. And then number three, marriage really is not managing one person. Marriage is really about how do you manage multiple roles with this one person. This person that you're married to is your friend, or should be. This person that you're married to is your lover and should be the only one. This person that you're married to is your business partner. We've already established money is one of the main reasons of divorce. So you have three right there, very different roles in this one person. And if one of those roles isn't managed properly, it can throw everything else off. So even if the money is right and your friendship is right, but the love ain't right, it's going to impact the relationship. So you have to learn how to manage all of the roles that come with this one person. And you also have to manage the fact that there are multiple stages of a person's life. So the roles will change as people get older. And I ain't even put nothing in here about parenting, which is a whole nother dynamic when it comes to marriage. How do you manage the kids and still take care of your marriage? Oh, it's a whole lot in here. I ain't even got time to talk about all of it, but I'm giving you just some snippets for basic guidelines. So we've talked about dating, talked about being engaged, talked about marriage and divorce, so now we got to talk about sex. First of all, I want you to know that we live in a culture that is very hyper-sexed. It is everywhere, and in most cases for the wrong reasons. I categorize the culture of what we're living in as a culture of sexual perversion. And perversion is anytime you take something that God has given and you twist it for your own benefit. That is perversion. So God gave sex to be in a specific way, in a specific context, and mankind, because of sin, has chosen to take that and twist it and use it for multiple versions of which God never intended for it to be. And because sex is so powerful, it is now all over the place. And unfortunately, our kids are getting access to illicit sex at a younger age, which is impacting their understanding of what relationships are and what they should be. So let's talk about it real quick in the time we have left. One, God created sex for enjoyment. There's no question about that. And he created it also for procreation, to reproduce. But he created sex for enjoyment and for procreation in a defined context. And that defined context was in a committed, monogamous relationship. Now, I haven't seen in scripture where sex is outside of that. And I know that there's lots of debate about what that should be. But for the believer, God created sex in a specific context, in a committed, monogamous relationship. But the key to great sex, y'all, is not the physical act, contrary to what people believe. The key to great sex in a committed, monogamous relationship is actually intimacy. And there's a huge difference between intimacy and sex. Intimacy is more connecting, it's more vulnerability, it's more of the things that really draw people closer to each other. If I were to give you an illustration of the two, to me, it's like a cake. Intimacy is the actual cake itself. Sex is the icing on the cake. If you only eat icing by itself tastes sweet for a while, but at a certain point, it'll make you sick. But it's the cake itself, along with the icing, that makes the cake what it is. If you're only in a relationship that has sex but no intimacy, then at a certain point, that's going to wear out. Intimacy is what makes the relationship what it is. So based on that, there's some real questions and challenges that believers must face in this society when it comes to sex. Number one, how does a believer manage their sexual drive or their sexual urges when they're not in a monogamous relationship? We're seeing people are delaying getting married. Less people are getting married today than ever before. More people are cohabitating than ever before. Where does sex fall in that? We see the impact of pornography, as already mentioned. And please understand, and pornography is not real sex. Pornography is staged, it is fantasy, and it is for the viewer, not for the two individuals. It's not real sex. And then real, for a lot of people, is what does it mean in today's times? Can a person, or should a person, still want to be chaste, virtuous, and honor God with their bodies? Is that something that is still valued in today's times? I'm not talking about for unbelievers. I'm talking about for the body of Christ. Is someone still being virtuous and honoring God and having sexual integrity? Does that still matter in the church? I pray the answer is yes. So we've covered a lot today, and I know that I've just kind of hit on different subjects. I would value your comments and your feedback on anything that I've covered today. I will check the comments and respond if you have any additional questions. But I want to leave you with these two things. Number one, for the believer, our relationship with God should be our guide in every other relationship that we have. Bottom line, grow your relationship with God first, and then let the Lord guide you in who you should date, who you should be engaged to, who you should marry, and certainly who you should be sexually involved with. If that relationship is first, then he'll make sure that he puts you in the spaces that will make sure that you're in good situations with others. And the reason why we want to go to God first is because God tells us that he knows the plans that he has for us. Plans to give us peace and plans to prosper us, to give us hope and a future. So that means that if we put it in the Lord's hands first, and if you are called to be married, he'll send you to that person when the time is right. If you're called to date, he will lead you to the person when the time is right. In most cases, when we decide to do it on our own is when we mess up. Also know that knowing who you are in Christ and knowing what you want in a relationship and knowing what you will stand on no matter what, which I hope is the word of God. These are the things that are necessary for you to have and be in a good relationship. So I hope I've answered a lot of the questions that people have had today. I've enjoyed my time with you talking about relationships. I could go on and on, but again, it all starts with our relationship with God. Get that one right, and then let the rest of them flow from there. Leave your comments again, as I've already mentioned. Let me know what you think about today's study, and look forward to future Bible study topics that we're going to cover in this series. Until next time, be blessed and be a blessing to someone else. Have a great day.